We good? Okay, this is just a little anatomy lesson on why too much oxygen is a problem. This is something it's good to understand. It's not something you're ever going to discuss with a patient. This is just for your understanding. Nurses and doctors should be the one explaining this to a patient or their family. But it's good for you to understand kind of how this works, because you'll understand the severity and how serious it can be if they get too much oxygen. So we've got two sensors that detect oxygen levels in our body. We've got one at the head, at the base of the brain. There's a sensor there that detects the pH level of your blood. Why it does that is because when CO2 is traveling in the blood, it increases the acidic level of your blood, and so the more CO2 you have, the more acidic your blood is. And so this sensor at the base of the brain detects the acidity level in your blood. So if it's getting really high, then your body, this tells your respiratory system, I need to start breathing faster to blow this CO2 off. The other sensor is at the heart. There's some sensors on the actual heart that detect oxygen. So these are detecting CO2 levels at the brain. The heart is detecting O2 levels. These sensors are there because the heart uses, when the blood passes through it, it's over 95% of the oxygen that runs through it. It uses all that oxygen up when it runs through those. So those coronary arteries are they're just supplying oxygen like crazy to the heart.
Wow.
It's a big user of oxygen. The muscles, just in contrast, your muscles I think are about 40% use. So the rest of your muscles use very little in compared to what your heart does. So oxygen is really, really important to your heart, and so it has sensors on it that detect oxygen levels. So if your oxygen levels drop and it starts to suffer, then it tells your respiratory to speed up. So most people, the primary driver for our respiratory system is this one at the base of the brain. What happens in some patients when they have a condition called COPD, these are patients that have got asthma, emphysema, those kinds of conditions. Those restrict the body's ability to blow CO2 out of the system. And so what happens is your blood carries a lot of CO2 in it. It can't get rid of the CO2 fast enough. Because in emphysema patients, for instance, is those alveoli, the sacs at the end of the lungs, those will collapse down and CO2 gets trapped in there and the CO2 can't get out. And so they can't blow this CO2 out fast enough. And so what happens is the blood elevation of it becomes more acidic and the CO2 levels get higher and higher. And eventually, if that's a chronic condition, that part of the brain is just going to shut down because it's like, this is my new normal. So it's called taking out your primary respiratory drive.
Yeah.
When that happens, now the only sensor that you have to drive your respiratory rate is your heart O2 sensors. So now, if your O2 gets low, your respiratory rate will increase. But if your CO2 levels go up, your heart doesn't care. So your CO2 levels could go through the roof, but your heart's just pumping away, just thinking it's fine. Now, this primary drive can be knocked out all the way, or it can be partially. Some people are more sensitive to it. It depends on what stage of their disease that they're at. But the problem now is this. When we bring oxygen into the system, they need oxygen. We can pump in, say we put 2 liters of oxygen in, and that brings them up to where they need to be as far as their oxygen levels. If we put more oxygen into the system, then the heart's just sitting there thinking, I'm fat and happy, and it's going to tell the respiratory system to slow down. Are you following what's happening here then? Mm-hmm. So what happens now is you start to breathe less, and your CO2 starts going through the roof.
Wow.
So now you're feeling more short of breath because your CO2 eventually will start to drive. That drives your need to breathe. So now I'm getting short of breath. I'm going to turn my oxygen up. So I was at 2 and that was fine. Now I moved it to 4 and now I feel even worse. I need 5. I need 6. So that's why they start turning this up, because they start feeling panicky, and it's called air hungry.
Like that Wallace.
Yeah, very, very similar. We have patients like this all the time. They'll want to turn their oxygen up, and what they're doing is the opposite effect of what they want to do, because their heart is what's driving the respiratory rate, and they don't understand that.
Yep.
And so more oxygen is better, and not in all cases. This is called oxygen toxicity situation, where we have a positive feedback and nothing to correct it. These two offset each other, and when they're working, they work to balance. But this one goes out, there's nothing to balance it, and this goes way off the charts.
Yep.
So you have to have these two, and COPD patients have a compromised, their primary respiratory rate is knocked out. So what happens though, what you've got to do is understand that oxygen levels in a healthy person, if it's 90% or above, you're healthy. 100% is never going to happen. Some people, they'll have that little thing on their finger and it's reading 95%, and they're like, I need more oxygen. I need more oxygen. Because my goal is 100%. No. The goal is 90% plus. The goal is not 100% here. 100% is not going to happen.
Never.
All this oxygen all that's doing is in your blood, there's a hemoglobin molecule in your blood. It has 4 binding sites for oxygen. And oxygen binds to each one of these sites. This is getting way deep, but this hemoglobin, when it does that, it restructures and it refracts light differently. So they put that little light on their thumb or their finger, and it measures the way that reflects the light through your finger, and that sensor detects it. So when we're saying 90%, we're saying 90% of every hemoglobin molecule in your blood is saturated with oxygen. So every one of them, 90% of all of them are carrying oxygen. You're never going to get 100%. You don't have perfect exchange.
Yeah.
Now, what happens though is if you get it down, 88% is considered the point, kind of a tipping point. If you get it 88%, it's not like this for oxygen. It's not a straight line going downhill. It's more like it's going like this, and then it's just a cliff. So if you get somebody that's in their 70s, they're going to fall very, very quickly. So 88% is kind of the brink of that cliff. If they get below that, then it's very quickly, you can get in trouble very quickly on the bottom side of that. So that's the goal, is to get them 88, 90% is healthy. Like you're probably sitting here right now at 90%, 94, 95 maybe.
Let's test it.
You could. Now, you'll never be at 100. Now, the goal is not 100. So if someone's got that thing on their finger and they're like, I need to be at 100%. You're like, no. You need to be at least 90% or better. And then if they're putting more and more oxygen in, it's like, I can only put 4 oxygen on that hemoglobin. I can put 5,000 around it, but it's only going to catch 4.
Yeah.
So if I put more and more oxygen into the system, it's not going to change how much oxygen they're covering.
Yeah,
how much their problem is CO2 issues. So more oxygen is not the answer for these people. So if they've got a prescription that says 2 to 3 liters, they need to be at 2 to 3 liters, and they should never change that without proper medical advice. And that doesn't come from us. That's always from a nurse or from a doctor. We may understand this process, and we may know what's going on here, but we can't give the medical advice. We just say, look, your prescription is 2 to 3. So when you're delivering oxygen, that's why when you set them up, you should write 2 liters is what I set them up on. And then the nurse goes out the next day and they're at 4, and they call you up and say, why did you set them up at 4 liters? You're like, I didn't. I put it at 2. And you document it on your paperwork at 2 liters.
Yep.
So now they've got to educate the patient and say, look, you need to be at 2 liters. You can't be at 4. Now, they're not going to understand all the anatomy and the chemistry behind this, but that's why they've got to stay on their flow. More is not better with oxygen all the time. Now, granted, some people can go way higher than that, but it's usually the blood issues. Their hemoglobin's not picking up enough oxygen for some reason. Their exchange isn't happening. Their capillaries are screwed up. But if it's a COPD patient, too much oxygen it can actually kill them.
Yeah.
If you get too out of whack. So anyway, that's the background of oxygen toxicity and where we're going with that 90% goal there. So.